Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Replay Office Hours. So I am Cecilia Martinez. I am the community lead here at Replay, and we do these streams almost every Friday to talk about new releases, things that have come out from this previous week with Replay, also highlight some things from the community and dig into some replays and do a little bit of live debugging. So yeah, welcome to the stream. Depending on where you're watching, you can watch from a few different locations. If you can find us at Replay.io on Twitch and Twitter, or you can also watch on YouTube at replay.io/YouTube. So that's also where you can see our previous episodes. So if you missed any office hours and are curious what the team is up to, you can check us out there. We do have guests on the stream from the team. And on a note there, we also are looking to have more guests from the community on stream. So if you are have stories around dev tools, debugging with Replay, or just in general, would love to have you on to chat about your experiences, what you've learned, and anything else that you're working on. So yeah, make sure to check us out there. So this week, we have a lot of updates. So had 2 change logs go out in the past, since the last time that we've had a stream. So there'll be a lot of new features to demo, some updates on some experimental things that we've been working on. And so I'm really excited to share those with you today. So awesome. Let me just go ahead and check the chat. So you can chat with us on Twitter right from the stream. You can post comments, or you can also, if you're watching on Twitch or YouTube, use the chat function to send us messages. So if you do have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or on a comment. Any questions related to replay, debugging, whatever it may be, feel free to post those and we'll get those answered during the stream. Awesome. So yeah, the first thing that I want to talk about today is, so last week we had Mark Erickson from the team on stream, and we chatted a lot of different things. Mark is always really great and educational, but we talked about how we kind of started a bit of a Twitter war in that there were 2 competing pull requests to update the package manager for the Replay DevTools repository. So Replay is open source. The front end is our DevTools repo. And Mark essentially was working on a big change to update the package manager. And he did a pull request with Yarn and a pull request with PNPM. I think I'm saying that right. Sometimes I get mixed up with letters. And so posted about it on Twitter and essentially was asking everybody which is the way to go. And so the decision was made. Yeah, PNPM. Okay. Decision was made to use Yarn as package manager. That was the one that landed. So for all of you who were very curious about what would end up happening there, did go ahead and end up merging Yarn 3 as the package manager. So the thread itself was actually super interesting. There was a lot of comments, like one way or the other, about which would be a better choice to go with. So definitely, if you are curious or if you've kind of had that own question in your own code base, there was a lot of really great kind of back and forth questions around and links to examples and points in that thread. So yeah, check that out. It's and then you can also see the pull request as well, like I said, in our DevTools repo. So everything in our DevTools repo, as I mentioned, is open source, and you can check that out if you're curious to take a look at how that change was made. And so that's at github.com/replayo/devtools. So awesome. So yeah, that's the first update. I know we're all waiting to find that out. So one of the things that I do like to do also on this stream, like I mentioned, is kind of highlight some tweets from the community, people who are talking about Replay on Twitter. We do have a public Discord as well, where we have talked to a lot of our users and people in the community. You can always join us there. The entire team works inside Discord. But we do have a lot of chats on Twitter as well. Tend to see a lot of activity there. So the first one that I kind of wanted to highlight from this past week is one from Martin Adams, who's building Flowtelic. So this tweet, actually, this is the second tweet in in kind of a thread here. But he said, not only did I update the app, I managed to recreate the bug super simple, go through the area of TypeScript code and see the variables of the exact point of failure. The bug was now extremely obvious, not one breakpoint needed. So the way that this thread started was essentially tried to use, like wanted to record a bug with replay, it was using an old version, so it had an error, and we actually detect, we have telemetry that detects user crashes. We reached out, said, hey, you need to update, and was able to like let him know that he needed to update the browser. So once he did that, was able to find the bug. And so that was kind of a fun one. We talked a little bit about kind of using replay for debugging. And the one thing that I thought was really interesting here specifically was the not one breakpoint needed. So we have some debate depending on who we're talking to around breakpoint debugging within replay. So replay does have breakpoints. You can add breakpoints to a line, and then you can step through the code the same way that you would with Chrome DevTools or Firefox DevTools or in your IDE, like wherever it may be. So we do give you that functionality to be able to say, hey, I want to stop on this line of code and like step around it or step through or into. The thing is with replay is because it's you have that time travel debugging aspect. Really what you can do is you can just add a print statement to a line of code and then see every single execution of that and jump back and forth between them within the recording. So I typically almost never use the breakpoint functionality in replay, but I know that there are people who do. The one that comes to mind is Andrus. He uses the breakpoints and the stepping through a lot. So yeah, it's interesting, especially when you're dealing with a lot of execution happening in a short period of time, like you would definitely see with TypeScript code. So that's kind of interesting to see that, debugging without breakpoints, especially when there's all that execution taking place in a short amount of time. With replay, you can just jump around and hop on that. And so we do have actually an example, a blog post around debugging TypeScript. You can debug it when recording in the browser. You can also record with replay node if you don't have it in the browser. But yeah, so you can check that out on our examples page. So replay.io/examples has a lot of great links and blog posts and replays to check out different use cases. And one of those is kind of debugging TypeScript and issues there. So thanks so much for tweeting at us, Martin. And I'm really glad that you were able to find your bug. So another bug squashed, exciting stuff. The next tweet that I wanted to talk about is this is from Stefano and talking about replay and this example from our last changelog, which came out June 20th, so a few days ago. And there was an example in here about debugging Shopify's Hydrogen. And Hydrogen is essentially a framework by Shopify, and we're kind of like recorded a replay, and Jason dug into it, did a quick video. And the second part of this tweet here is that talking about how understanding what an app does becomes easy. I think of it as an introspection or reverse engineering tool other than a debugging tool. And I love this example. I love this tweet. I love this example because one of the things that we talk about, in addition to debugging, is how at its core, replay actually really helps you better understand what your code is doing so that you can learn about your code and you can better identify patterns because when really with debugging, you need to know your code base, you need to know what the expected behavior is of your code base, and you need to be able to identify patterns to understand where the variation is, because that's where the bug usually occurs. And so being able to inspect execution at different points in time and see how those connections take place helps you learn a code base. And that's something that we've talked a little bit about before on stream. We kind of talked about this kind of exploring with replay. There's a code-based orientation. We did a kind of this example here where we looked at the hot open sauce pizza site with a replay in order to kind of dig in and learn that code base and learn that code base, how the code is actually executing. And yeah, it's really exciting to see people using replay that way, because that's how I learned the replay code base initially when I joined, was looking at replays, just clicking around, seeing what functions called other functions, seeing what triggered state changes. And all of that was really helpful to be able to see it happening and then rewind and then absorb it again, and then rewind from a different perspective and absorb it again, within the same replay, without having to uh, run it locally or try to add breakpoints or try to catch things. Everything was already captured. And so I did also want to dig into that replay that Stefano mentioned in the tweet. So I'm going to go ahead and reload it up here. So this is a replay, kind of like we mentioned. This is a called Hydrogen. It is a framework developed by Shopify and this is their kind of a demo app called Snow Devil, which has some snowboards, and it's like a kind of like an e-commerce app, which makes sense for Shopify developers. And just to kind of replay this, it's just, kind of an introduction, just a recording the site itself, clicking on a few things, kind of a standard. This is kind of a good way when you are wanting to create a replay in order to learn a code base, is if you want to better understand a specific functional path or a specific user flow, you record yourself recreating that user flow, or maybe you even just want to visit all the pages on the site in order to see how they render. You can record yourself doing that, and then all that code execution is captured that you can then dig into. So in this case, we'll go ahead and hop over to DevTools. And one of the things that Jason kind of identified is just one of the things that we talk about a lot, especially with React applications, is understanding renders and understanding why components render and when they do. And so, there's a couple of things that you can do, right? We have the React developer tools, and you can come in and you can kind of you can pick one, and then you can dig in and see how it was rendered. And we can see here that, this is like an image component that was rendered by gallery, and then product details. And as we hover over them, you can see on the screen how we're this is image, this is media file, this is the entire gallery, and this is product details. You can then click into these and then go into the next one, right? And you can see the name of the component. You can see if there's any props. So in this case, we do have a product, and you can see all of the objects associated, all the properties on that product object, and dig into that way. So that's usually how I start to kind of orient myself, is I personally like to use the React picker, and I'll hover over, I'll kind of get a sense of like what components are on the DOM. And again, you can also do that across different points of time. What I typically like to do too is take a look at the events. And so, I'll go to the initial page load, maybe the first click, and be like, okay, this is a certain state. I can take a look at the different components that are available, and I can see, we have our main component there, context provider with some children. But then, I can see I have this header component. I have this, coming in here, I have some additional, it looks like we're using suspense here. We have links, we have each individual kind of card here as a link as well. And then I may kind of click forward and then dig in from there. Once I've identified a component that I want to inspect more, then I'll go ahead and open it up in the source. And so, well, in Source Explorer, we do capture all the files that ran, or I'm sorry, all the code that executed in the browser, including the sources and the files. And so I'll come in here and I'll take a look at the components and find those corresponding ones. So one of the ones that we saw was, we saw like that kind of product details component. And immediately we get some information about this component. A couple of things I wanted to show is that, you see this function outline here. And so we can see that there's 4 functions in this file: add to cart markup, size chart, product prices, and details. And we can see how many times they executed. And then we can also see that this, it returned 10 times. And if we open up this print statements box, we can kind of open up the console here, and we can jump to each of these instances of it being rendered. And on the DOM, we can kind of see that it looks like there's some activity. We're clicking around in product details. And so every time that we're doing that kind of click action and then the initial load, this is re-rendering. And we can log to the console this kind of selected variant. And there's autocomplete. And we can save that. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this for a minute here just to give us some more space. And then again, for each of these logs, of each of these occurrences, each of these renders, we can see the selected variant, and we can kind of dig into that and see more information about that object. But it's interesting to kind of understand how these are related, how the DOM changes every single time that this re-renders. And that was essentially the point of the initial tweet and of Jason's video, right? So same thing with, we talked about gallery. We can see the gallery has a function here and it rendered 10 times as well. So every time that the product details was re-rendering, so was the gallery component. And so understanding the relationship there, which makes sense because again, going back kind of to our React element picker, we were able to kind of understand that gallery is inside product details, right? So it would make sense that they would have an equivalent number of renders. If there wasn't an equivalent number of renders, then it would be interesting to understand why that is. Maybe there was a hook or state change that was causing gallery to render more times than product details. But this is a way for you, like I've never seen this code base before. I barely looked at this replay before, honestly. And so this is a way for me to better understand and to dig in using replay without having to pull down the code base, without having to overwhelm myself with everything. I can focus on a specific subset of behavior, which in this case is how does this product details, how does the product page render, and dig into that specifically. So, and already know what code ran during that recording and where to dig into the components. So thanks so much for kind of sharing that tweet and highlighting this video. It was, I think it's all, and also kind of highlighting the use case of being able to learn with replay. One other thing that I did want to share too, and this isn't necessarily an update about replay, but it's related. So Brian Vaughn on the team was investigating a rendering performance problem with part of the replay console. So I thought it might be helpful to share how I use profiling tools to diagnose what's slow and then a way to fix it. And so I love this example because we don't typically see people debugging live and in the wild. And it's something where getting a sense of how people debug and seeing their process can be super, super helpful to learn how to get better at it. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this link to this tweet in the chat, but there's an entire thread. And the thread has some Loom videos. It talks about like how he essentially starts by stumbling through the code and then narrowing in on a part of the slowness, which is very common. And then like how he's using different tools, including the profiler. So React Dev Tools does have a profiler tool. Talked about that before with a talk that I did on debugging React applications. And it allows you to kind of like replay, you know, but for a different purpose, record your application and like and then what it does is it exports you know, the component like performance, how long it took for things to load, which one's loaded, and that helps to kind of be able to understand like what's slow and why. And so this is a really great thread. I encourage you to check it out. Brian from the team, Mark Erickson from the team, they do a lot of kind of tweeting about their process, tweeting about debugging, tweeting about development, and it can be really helpful to see that in action. Yeah, and so make sure you check that out. Like again, another example of kind of Brian working on Twitter and sharing Loom videos is working on the new object inspector, which, you know, leads me to some of our releases. So I'm going to talk about some of the new features that Replay released in the past week. I'm going to go ahead and just check for any comments quickly before we hop into those. Awesome. Okay, looks like we're good. No questions. Great. Okay, so Replay had some releases this week. We did some stuff. We're pretty busy, so I'm excited to share a lot of this with you. The first thing that we're trying to talk about is that new object inspector UI. So this is experimental. It is an experimental feature that you can enable in replay. This is the pull request here. Go ahead and share this. So this is the new Object Inspector UI. This was the initial architecture investigation. There's actually a couple of different PRs related to it, but what the Object Inspector is, and I'll demo it for you just in a second. We've had it for a while. I think Jason said that the original Object Inspector comes from, I think it comes from the original kind of Firefox dev tool. It's about 6 years old. And so wanted to improve it in terms of the architecture behind it. Instead of using, Mark talked about this on stream last week, dependency on a value called something called value front, and instead using React suspense in order for the new architecture. So we can take a look at it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use this replay. Instead, I'll go ahead and close this one out just because I'm familiar with this one. It's a replay of replayable.dev, which is one of our project sites that has GitHub issues that include a replay. So as I mentioned before, this is an experimental setting. So the first thing we want to do is enable that. So in our settings, we can go to experimental. And we can, I have it enabled already because I was just playing with it. But we'll go ahead and this is where you would enable it. So enable new object inspector for UI source viewer. And so what the object inspector is go ahead and open up a source. I'm going to open up a page. Yeah, we'll start here. We'll pick this one. And I'm going to try and make this as big as possible so you can see it. Hopefully you can see it okay. And so, so what an object inspector is we'll go ahead and lock into something that has some hits. Okay, so this has some hits. And we'll go ahead and jump to a given point in time. Maybe this one here. And as you hover over sources in replay, it kind of like tells you what the value is for that given point in time. And if you get to an object, let's see if I can find one here. Yeah, okay, so if you get to an object, you kind of have this object inspector that pops up. And it's like a little box, right? And it lets you kind of see this hierarchy of the object itself. And so we've updated the object inspector. It's really helpful if you're looking, for example, at like a document in the window or anything like that. But what that does is it kind of updates again the architecture and it updates some of the kind of the UI of it. So to compare, I'll go ahead and turn off the object inspector. Where is it? New object inspector. And we'll take a look at that same kind of object that we were just looking at. I think it was query here. Yes, and so a little different. The architecture is a little different. It's a little bit slower to load initially. So the new one is updated. And so, yeah, so you should see some improved kind of experience there, and then also some improved performance with the new one. So that is the object inspector. Wanted to share that. Again, that's experimental. You can set that in your experimental tab in DevTools. And so the next thing is also an experimental features, and it's also something we talked about last week, but it is inline hit counts. So I mentioned earlier, we have this kind of like function outline that shows you how many times a function executed. You may have noticed as I'm hovering over lines, we can see how many times a line hit, but you have to hover over for that to work. And I'm gonna go ahead and come into this one here. So we can see like how many times each line hit, but you do have to hover over to get that information. So with line hit counts, what it does is it adds a heat map to show you how many times a line of code executed in your source. So again, experimental, we'll go ahead and turn that on. So inline hit counts is here. We just saw a change in the DOM behind, or in the UI behind me. I also wanted to show that in preferences, there is a setting. So this heat maps setting, which only really matters if you have it turned on. By default, we will hide the counts. You can also show counts, which will show the actual number of times a line has executed, or you can also have it as hidden by default. Now, this is the default behavior. you can still interact with it, which I'll show here in just a second. But by default, we're going to hide the counts, but show the heat map. And so if you wanted to change any of that once you enable this, that's where you would update your preferences. And so here we can see this is our heat map. It's a color bar, and it is darker blue for more hits, lighter blue for less hits, gray for no hits, right? And I mentioned that by default, it's hiding the counts. So if we click on the bar here, it will expand. And again, I'm going to try and make this as big as possible. Yeah, just kind of zoom in here. Okay, so it'll show the number of times that line hit. So if you hover over, it's 108, 108, 72, 72. But without having to hover in our source, we can see all those executions and we can see the lines. So just to kind of keep things clean, by default, we do hide this. And so if you click on it again, it'll hide. So you can see the color lines by default. You can see the color of, okay, those lines hit more, those lines hit less, those lines didn't hit at all. And then if you want to get the actual numbers, you can click on it to expand. So that is what I mean by the different setting types. So hidden is it's completely like you don't see anything. Show, and you can show values, which will show the hit count number, or you can hide, which will by default have them hidden, but then you can click to expand. So this is a pretty small file. This is a pretty small replay. But as you can probably imagine, if you think about if you have a lot of executions, getting a really, really quick sense of which lines are executing more or less frequently. And that's in the context of the source itself, not the entire code base. So that's in relation to the source. It can be really helpful. So we were talking about the renders earlier, right? And how sometimes you'll have things that render more often than you realize or should, and being able to see, okay, these lines are hitting a lot and these lines aren't hitting at all can, or I was expecting these lines to hit just a few times and they've hit a bunch, or I was expecting this line to hit and it didn't hit at all. That can help you zero or kind of like hone in on where you need to go for your debugging. So we're really excited about this. This started way back, like with the change to our API. So we used to only fetch the number of hit counts once you actually went to that line and you hovered over it. So you used to see a loading and then it would say the number of hit counts. But we initially changed our API so that it fetched everything at once. So we had all the information about the hit counts in that source from the beginning. The next step then was adding in that information to the UI. And that's what this does. It allows you to see it all at once without having to hover. And so we think that'll be a really great improvement to better understanding your code and knowing where to go when you need to debug, but then also understanding how it works. So that is inline hit counts, again, is the name of that setting. So again, experimental inline hit counts needs to be enabled. And then you also may want to update your preference here to either show counts, hide counts, or hidden. So let us know what you think. That is experimental, so we definitely need feedback. If you have any issues with it, let us know. You can reach out to us. You can chat with us in our Discord is really the best way. We have an open Discord where our team works, and you can chat along with all the engineering team. Or you can also always reach out to us on Twitter at support@replay.io. There's a lot of ways to get in touch with us. So yeah, let us know what you think. So another couple of things that I wanted to highlight. One is in our change to our network monitor. For now, I'm going to go ahead and disable these experimental settings just so we can kind of focus in. So the network monitor lets you see what network requests occurred throughout the recording, throughout your replay, right? And we made a lot of improvements to it over the past 6 months. It was a feature that actually like launched when I first started at Replay. I think it was like right before I started in December. And so made a lot of changes along the way. You can now, for example, you can add comments directly to a network request. You can see the timings of when it started, the wait time to first byte, ended time, total time. And so the most recent update that we've made, and I'll kind of make this bigger here, is the stack trace now has groupings. So these are kind of the stack trace But then it also has a group here, and you can see React. And I'm going to go ahead and so it's kind of hard to see a little bit. I think maybe if I make it into dark mode, it might be a little bit easier to see on the screen. Yeah, a little bit. Okay. So there's this kind of grouping here for React. And that's the call stack that's within the framework itself. And so what this is really doing is it essentially includes framework groups, which makes it easier to see like where the request kicked off. So if there's a fetch request that's kicking off from React, if it's kicking off from a different framework, I've seen ones in here for Redux before. Those are going to be grouped together so that you can click into those if you need to debug it if that's what you're focusing on. So previously they were all kind of all together. Now those are going to be grouped by framework so you can better understand where the requests are coming from and dig into the ones that are framework specific. So nice improvement there from the network monitor. I told you we had a lot, so I have 2 more to show you, and then we can dig into a replay. So next is the unicorn picker. So this is like a fun thing that I like a lot, and I'm gonna. So I've shown it here before, but I'm gonna dig in. Yeah, I'll do this. Okay, so this is I kind of just like this file because it's clean. So the unicorn picker. So whenever you add a print statement, it automatically logs to the console, right? And then you can update and change the variables. But one of the things that we had added was the ability to essentially color code or prefix or categorize a print statement so that you can better identify it. So if I have, a bunch of these things and they're all inside the same function, it all looks like get label font color with like the line numbers next to it. And that can get a little confusing. And so we gave you the ability to identify these by changing the thing. And so now you can do it with one click. Previously, there was a box on the bottom that you would essentially need to click on in order to open this. Now you can just click and you can choose a prefix and it'll update. So I can color code these like really quickly, or I can unicorn code them, if you will, as well. And so now I'm able to see which logs are associated with a specific print statement line. And so that makes it really easy for me to like categorize in the console what's happening and understand, even if the name of the function is the same or what I'm outputting is similar, I can color code those. And I can do it now with one click. The other thing that you can do is from a console log, you can also right click and you can choose on a specific console. So if I kind of like remove this one here, I'll go ahead and just clear these out. Okay. And I say, oh, you know what? Like this console log type, like I want to highlight it. And I can come in here and I can right click and I can choose that and it'll apply it. So I now have 2 places that I can add that categorization depending on where I'm working out of. So if I'm in the source file, I'm in the print statement, I can add it there to begin with. If I've logged to the console and I'm working in the console and I identify something that I do want to mark and that's important to me, then I can do it from the console by right clicking and then choosing that icon there. You can also remove them and set them up that way too. One other thing that you may have noticed is when I right click, there's also this set focus start and set focus end feature. So that has to do with our focus mode. So as you can see, and I did that, it kind of changed this region here. So focus mode allows you to specify a region for debugging. So if you wanted to like drag in and maybe only take a look at this section of the replay, you can do that. And then it'll only show the things that are happening within that time. So I could fast forward here and be like, you know what, I actually want to start here instead. And then I can set my focus start, and that's going to automatically update my focus mode region to start there. And I can even come in and be like, you know what, it's like this specific thing. And I can set my focus end. And now I have cleared out everything else from outside that area. So when I find a console log that matters to me and I want to zero in there, I can go ahead and set the focus mode directly from the console without having to map it back to, a region here on the timeline. So if you use focus mode a lot, if you need, especially if you have a lot of, again, fast code execution in a small period of time, being able to start or end from a specific log is super, super helpful, and just makes it a much, much more efficient process. So, okay, those are the updates. I told you we had a lot to get through. Bearing with me. Sorry about that. Thanks for bearing with me in showing all those. I hope that you found some that you didn't know about and that you're excited to check out and give us some feedback. Okay, so last thing I want to do on stream here today is to highlight just like a project that the team has been working on, specifically Travis Arnold primarily, super serious on Twitter. And this is a really cool, it's like still a work in progress, but I wanted to highlight it and kind of check it out and maybe dig into the code a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and add my screen back in. So this is, I'll go ahead and again pop this into the chat. A link to the repo here, and so this is github.com replayo/overboard. So this will be a kind of a fun demo buggy site to use with Replay. Again, it's work in progress, but this is the repo. It's public, it's open source. I mentioned Super Serious, which is a great name, but it's Travis Arnold who joined our team in May to work on visual debugging and is a like just visual like CSS, like I don't know how to describe it, just like I don't know, but it's just like very, very talented in that area. And I love the work that he produces. It's really fun to like talk to him about CSS and visual elements and things like that. And so if you are interested in design, like like front-end development, that space, visual things, definitely give him a follow and check him out because he has some really cool examples. And one of them is this overboard.dev site. So this is a site that sells hoverboards. So I got some really cool hoverboards. It's called, the Overboard Bug Slayer. It's going to be like a Replay demo site. You can kind of like toggle through different colors here, and the hoverboard has this really cool animation. We've got this kind of like vaporwave Tron background, and just like really love the graphics here. But the point is, if we want to add something to the cart, we get an error. So again, this is a Bucky site, kind of similar to replayable.dev if you've seen streams around that, in that, when you want to use Replay, best to have, to start with debugging, give you a bug to work with. And so I'm going to go ahead and record this site with Replay. I haven't done this before, actually, so we'll kind of see what happens if there's source maps and all that fun stuff. But yeah, so we'll kind of just dig in a little bit and see what we can find in the code. So I have it pulled up here. This is the Replay browser. I'm going to go ahead and hit record. And again, like work in progress, playing with it, but we'll kind of just dig in and see. So I changed some colors here, changed to green, and I'll add to cart. I get an error, and I'll go ahead and stop recording. So that's my Replay. I'll go ahead and make this public because why not? And I'll save it. And I like to work in Chrome because that's where all of my settings are saved primarily. So I'll go ahead and open that up here in Chrome and take a look at the Replay. All right, so let's start by just, we'll view. And again, we can see what I kind of clicked on the different colors, and then I add to cart, and there's an error. Oh no. Okay, so let's see what's going on in DevTools. And again, I haven't looked at this code base, so I don't really know too much about it, but we'll see. So it looks like we do have an error, which is coming from the application itself. You can see color not found, received undefined, and that's coming from the purchase form.tsx. So that's helpful to know. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for now, just because I want to explore a little bit in the code base first. And so hopefully this is big enough. I bumped up the font size. Okay, cool. So again, I'm going to start with the kind of the React picker. Okay, looks like we do have component names, so that's good. And kind of hovering over. So I want to start with this, just like kind of exploring a little bit. So I'm curious like what this button does. And let's see, it has a value, animate is undefined, undefined. We'll go a little bit higher up here and see where we are. Okay, purchase button. This is what I'm looking for. So purchase button has error true. Okay, so that is a prop, which I'm assuming is affecting the message and the color for that there. So we have here a column that has 3 colors. So there's the replay color key, which is cool. Then there's Rasta, and then there's Ghost. Okay, and we can see that on change, the start color, value Ghost, label Ghost, end color, which is okay, cool. So the start color and an end color, probably related to the animation there. And then like, oh, like the kind of the front, the start and the end, you know, we have the 2 colors represented there, and they kind of like show this circle and the color. So the color itself is a component that has 2 props of the start and the end color, and it visualizes that way. One other thing I want to look at is the purchase form, right? Because that's where the error that we saw occurred. So our purchase form has some hooks. It has state true, callback function, and then we have kind of like the actual app. I'm curious whatever state there is here. We have some context providers. Yeah, so we got values here. We got children. Okay, cool. So I feel like I'm kind of comfortable with what some of the components are around here. I'm going to dig into the source. So components, we had like this purchase button, right? And purchase button looked like it rendered 4 times. So I'm actually kind of curious about that. I'm going to go ahead and put it back on the console here. So function but purchase button has a prop of has error, which is a Boolean. And okay, so cool. So motion button, it's disabled equals has error, while tap animates. If it has error, the background is variable, which is background error. Otherwise, it's background. Yep, so I was right. The background color and the color is kind of changing depending on whether it has an error or not. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this here. And I'm curious, like, I wonder if I can log has, yeah, I can. Cool. Has error. Now save that. Okay, cool. Yeah, so here has error is false, still false, still false. And then after this point, it's true when it renders. And I can go like right after that because it's like right after the render. And we can see like, I don't know if you can see that. That's really neat. So I can see the animation changing, right? Like I can see it moving from add to cart to this error state. So it has error. And while it has error, the background color is like animating the difference there from the foreground color. And there's a style here. You can see the animation. You can see the animate here, you know, has error. It changes, the opacity changes, and the transition is this 0.2 seconds. So I'm going to make the viewer really big here. So we can see once that state changes, that transition kicks off and the animation will change and it'll go with this error state. And that the code itself is managed by that has error variable. And that's really cool. So the animation is all kind of managed by that, and it has the error here. So that's really cool. That's like a really neat, smooth animation being managed by that prop. Looks like it's using framer motion, which makes sense. So that is that's the purchase button. That's pretty neat example there. I want to dig into the error. Actually, you know what? I want to dig into the colors. The error I'm not super concerned with. I'm kind of just trying to learn this. So the other thing was, you know, this was the colors, right? This colors component. And we had 2 props in there. We had a couple of props, but we had a start color and an end color. And it looks like the color component has like some color ways here. Normal, luminosity, and exclusion. That's cool. And the type here. And we have the color stop. So here's the kind of the start colors, the end colors that correspond there. And this is, so we have stop 1, stop 2, and that's the start color and the end color. of the style there. And oh, look, it's like an input, it's a radio element actually. And it has a style of, and a stop 1 and stop 2 here. And those are being those are being based on the start color and end color. That is pretty neat. And there looks like an on color change function. And it looks like it is accepting that, probably coming down from, well, let's see what's rendering that element. So I go to React and I pick my color here. On color change is a prop, and that's being rendered by there. So colors, that's kind of coming from that still too. On color change is still a prop. Let's see. Let's go ahead and maybe find that function because I'm curious. So actually, I'm going to do a function search. So search for a function on color change, and it's going to take me to this one of the source. I wanted the actual one. So let me try here the actual on color change. Okay, and that is in our purchase form. Cool. So yeah, so on color change, on data change, it's going to be color to and color here. So that's going to be managed there. And this is a function that takes an ID and a payload. So that's pretty cool. Okay, cool. So here, actually, while I'm in this purchase form component, we can see that there is an error message, and const error message is await response.text, and then set has error to true if the response is not okay, and throw new error message. And we have a hit here, right? So, and again, has error was that state, that prop that was being passed down to control the error button. And so we have a hit here. I'm going to go to that hit. I'm going to lock in on it, and I'm going to log. So I have this handle submit. I have the hit here. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can actually, I'm going to do that. I'm going to see what the response is, if I can log the response. Might not be able to, but let me check and see. Okay, cool, I can. Because I'm not sure what I can log or not, but okay. So response was status 400. Okay is false. The text is bad request. Okay, so we're able to see the response, which triggered this error message, and we set has error to true. And now I want to dig into this network request, right? That's what we want to do. So we can see that it's going to the API here, and we can go ahead and fetch AXHR for some filtering or network request by that. And I'm going to go to purchase, which is the post request that we just tried to make. And I'm going to take a look at the details here. So I can see the request headers. I can see the response headers. Let's take a look at the request. So color was ghost, which is, yep, I had that last color selected, which corresponds to that. And the response is color not found, received undefined. Interesting. Okay. Because I can see that color is ghost here in the request body. So yeah, so that's interesting because it's saying that it's receiving something that's undefined. So okay, we're getting close on time, but now I want to like trace this down a little bit more just out of curiosity, but I'll wait and we can save that for either another stream or once this actually is kind of ready to go. But that is very interesting to me that the request body does seem to say root color and it has the ghost, but the response is saying that color is not found and it received undefined. I have a feeling that something is either that is something's happening there with the handler, or when we're sending the request, maybe it's not the right property, but we will wait and dig into that later. But yeah, hope this was interesting for you. The site is live. It's overboard.dev, so you can record it yourself with replay, dig into the code, go further than I did. There's also, like I said, the code base is open source, so you can go ahead and check that out as well. if you want to dig in even more. It's a work in progress. Like I said, I didn't check with Travis before I put this on stream, but hopefully he doesn't mind. But it looks really cool. Like it's a great case study in really neat animations. And so, yeah, definitely check that out and let us know what you think and if you find any more bugs. So awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today on stream. Like I mentioned again, you can watch replays of this at replay.io/YouTube. You can also join us in Discord at replay.io/Discord to chat with the team. If you are interested in being on a future stream to talk about your project, your debugging, anything related to development process, debugging, super excited to chat with you and have you join us. Feel free to reach out to me. I am Cecilia Creates on Twitter. So you can always also reach out to me directly. So, all right. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we will catch you next week. Cheers.